"Ma'am, please move to the back. This section is reserved for first-class passengers." The flight attendant's clear, firm voice resonated through the cabin as phones snapped into action. Vanessa Bennett looked up from her tablet, her expression completely composed, betraying no hint of emotion. She wore a simple gray hoodie, faded jeans, and carried a slightly worn leather bag. There was nothing about her to suggest she was a high-powered executive. To everyone watching, she was just another passenger being told she didn't belong here. In front of her, flight attendant Laura Evans tapped impatiently on her tablet, her tone heavy with doubt. "Did you hear me? You're in the wrong seat." Vanessa calmly held up her boarding pass. "Seat 1A, first class." Laura's eyes narrowed. "There must be some mix-up. Let me see your ID." All around them, dozens of passengers raised their phones to record. An Instagram account called @FlyWatcher went live instantly. Have you ever watched someone's life change completely in less than an hour? Real-life stories, especially Black stories, can spark a wave strong enough to shake an entire system. The first-class cabin of Atlantic Airways fell into a hushed silence, perfumed faintly with luxury fragrance. Vanessa Bennett, the renowned Black CEO of Bennett Enterprises, had settled into seat 1A, her usual spot when traveling for business. She exhaled softly and opened her laptop to prepare for her keynote at the international conference in Chicago. In her gray hoodie, worn-in jeans, and white sneakers, she looked every bit the low-key traveler, far removed from the expensive power suits that grace the covers of the world's top business magazines. Suddenly, the click, click, click of stiletto heels cut through the calm. Laura Evans, young, blonde hair pulled back neatly, face sharply defined, strode up to Vanessa's seat, her gaze sweeping from head to toe with undisguised suspicion. "I'm sorry, but you're in the wrong seat. This section is only for premium customers," Laura announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Vanessa lifted her head, smiled politely, her eyes steady. "I'm not in the wrong seat." She held out her phone, displaying the e-boarding pass, which clearly read 1A, first class. "I booked this ticket 3 weeks ago." Laura's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm sure there's been an error. May I see your photo ID?" Vanessa unhurriedly reached into her hoodie pocket and handed over her driver's license. Laura examined it closely, her eyes flicking between the photo and Vanessa's face, as if hunting for any sign of deception. "Is there a problem?" Vanessa asked, her voice calm and measured. Laura frowned, her skepticism unshaken. "It's probably just a system glitch. This ticket might not be valid. I'll need you to move to economy until we verify it." The words hung in the air like a blade, and the cabin atmosphere grew tense. Passengers whispered among themselves, eyes darting between Vanessa and Laura. Vanessa felt the sting of prejudice, yet she remained composed. "I understand you're doing your job, but there's no mistake. I paid in full for this first-class ticket." Laura's lips curled into a condescending smile. "Perhaps you're not familiar with how premium bookings work. These seats are expensive and not for everyone. You should move now to avoid further inconvenience." The cabin felt frozen after that remark. A few passengers muttered under their breath. Though Vanessa was no stranger to complex challenges, she couldn't deny the hurt that tinted Laura's words. Meeting Laura's gaze without flinching, Vanessa replied firmly, "I suggest you double-check your system before making unfounded assumptions. This not only affects me, but also reflects on the airline's reputation." Laura paused, her expression flickering for a moment, then regained her icy composure. She nodded curtly and turned away, her heels clicking sharply on the cabin floor, leaving Vanessa and the onlookers in a buzz of curiosity and concern. Vanessa sighed quietly. This was only the beginning of what promised to be a turbulent flight. Yet she knew one thing for certain. She would not silently accept discrimination, if not for herself, then for all those who might lack her strength and composure to stand up to such injustice. Laura turned away, and Vanessa leaned back into her seat, exhaling softly as if trying to shake off the discomfort that had just surfaced. She prided herself on her ability to stay calm, but the attendant's dismissive, condescending attitude felt like a personal insult. The other passenger's eyes remained on her, a mix of curiosity and doubt, as if waiting to see how the situation would unfold. Less than a minute later, Laura reappeared, striding back with the confidence of someone ready to win any argument. She stopped in front of Vanessa and tilted her chin up, her tone still firm. "I've double-checked your ticket, and while the code is correct, something still seems off. I'll need to verify with reservations to be sure. In the meantime, it would be best if you moved to economy so as not to disturb the first-class passengers." Vanessa calmly set her phone and documents on the little table in front of her, meeting Laura's gaze with unwavering composure. "I'm sorry, but I can't agree to that. I purchased my ticket properly. There's nothing wrong with it. If you need more time to verify, I'm happy to wait right here." Laura's expression flickered with annoyance, her discomfort obvious. At that moment, a warm yet authoritative voice cut through the tension from the seat next to them. "Miss, I think you should do as the attendant says. No need to make a bigger deal out of it." Vanessa turned to see the elderly gentleman in 2A, George Hamilton, a well-known businessman with perfectly combed silver hair and an impeccably tailored suit. His calm, experienced eyes betrayed a hint of cold disdain. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I'm making things complicated," Vanessa replied politely, keeping her tone even. Mr. Hamilton inclined his head slightly, his voice soft but loaded with subtext. "What I mean is, sometimes knowing your place from the start saves you from unnecessary trouble. I'm sure you understand." Each word felt like ice, freezing the air with its implicit bias. The passengers grew silent, the tension in first class rising by the second. Everyone understood the hidden prejudice behind Mr. Hamilton's courtesy and watched Vanessa, waiting for her reaction. Vanessa steadied her breathing, though anger surged within her. As a CEO seasoned in dealing with all manner of people, she recognized that both Mr. Hamilton and Laura shared the same underlying assumption, that a modest black woman like her didn't belong here. "I understand my place very well, Mr. Hamilton," Vanessa said gently but firmly, her eyes unshaken. "I'm here because I earned it. I purchased this seat legally and paid in full. I'm sure you agree that where someone sits shouldn't be decided by their appearance or skin color, right?" Her clear, decisive words drew a frown from Mr. Hamilton. He hadn't expected such confidence. A few other passengers who had been watching now looked at Vanessa with newfound respect, recognizing this was more than a simple ticket mix-up. Sensing things slipping beyond her control, Laura interjected hurriedly, trying to reclaim authority. "I don't think we need to argue any further. I'll report this to the flight operations team for resolution. In the meantime, please remain calm and patient." She shot Vanessa one last skeptical glance before hurrying off toward the crew area. The click-clack of her heels on the cabin floor sounded like a drumbeat, signaling the conflict was far from over. Vanessa inhaled slowly, steadying her racing heart. She knew this was only the beginning of a much more complex confrontation, but this time she would not back down to anyone's prejudice, not just for herself, but for the dignity and rights of anyone who might face the same injustice. The sharp click of Laura's heels faded behind the cabin curtain, but Vanessa stayed perfectly still, eyes fixed on her laptop screen as she fought to steady her thoughts after the earlier confrontation. No matter how hard she tried, she could feel the other passengers' gazes on her, curious, expectant, waiting to see what would happen next. Less than 5 minutes later, heavy footsteps rang out from the front of the aircraft, drawing everyone's attention toward the cockpit door. A tall man in a pristine pilot's uniform strode into the cabin. His polished nameplate read, "Robert Mitchell, Captain," and his stern expression made it clear he was the ultimate authority on this flight. Captain Mitchell halted at Vanessa's seat and gave her a hard, appraising look. Without waiting for an explanation, he turned to Laura, who was standing next to him with a tense, serious expression. "Miss Evans, please brief me on the situation," he said in a cold, commanding tone. Laura seized the moment. "Captain Mitchell, this passenger insists she holds a valid first-class ticket, but I have been unable to verify it. She refuses to move and is causing a significant delay to our departure." Captain Mitchell frowned, glancing at Vanessa as if her simple attire spoke volumes about her integrity. Without requesting her documents or asking any further questions, he immediately issued an accusation. "Ma'am, you do understand that deliberately occupying a higher class than you're ticketed for violates airline policy. Frankly, I don't see why you'd inconvenience other passengers and delay our flight like this." Vanessa lifted her head, eyes widening with surprise at the bluntness of his words. She remained composed, responding politely yet firmly. "I'm sorry, but you haven't reviewed my ticket or ID. I have no intention of fraud or seat upgrading. All my documents are legitimate and were fully verified at check-in." Captain Mitchell's gaze hardened, brimming with skepticism and entirely uninterested in hearing her out. "I've been flying for years. I've seen situations like this many times. To be honest, I don't believe someone like you legitimately purchased this first-class ticket. The best thing you can do now is leave this seat immediately before I'm forced to call security." His words, "someone like you," struck at Vanessa's pride like a dagger. First class fell into an oppressive silence as passengers exchanged uneasy looks, fully grasping the prejudice behind his remark. Vanessa met Captain Mitchell's eyes, anger smoldering beneath her calm exterior. "If you truly care about the truth, you'll take a minute to examine the documents and ticket I presented. I assure you, everything is lawful and proper. Refusing to verify and jumping to conclusions like this is unacceptable." A flash of anger crossed Captain Mitchell's face. He was unaccustomed to being challenged by a passenger, especially a woman he'd already judged as unworthy of that seat. His wounded pride overwhelmed any desire to listen. "I won't debate this further. This is not the place for you to continue making a scene and delaying our departure. I order you to vacate this seat immediately. If you refuse, I will not hesitate to call airport security." Laura, standing beside him, allowed a subtle look of triumph to cross her features. She felt the full force of the captain's authority behind her, and believed this was the outcome she wanted. A few nearby passengers who had first felt sympathy for Vanessa now began to waver in their support, swayed by the captain's firm ruling. Vanessa drew a deep, steadying breath, searching for the best way to navigate this tense moment without sacrificing her dignity. She knew her personal honor was on the line, and the honor of countless others who had faced similar unwarranted bias. Resolute, she vowed that whatever followed, she would not yield to the unfair prejudice Captain Mitchell and Laura Evans had so blatantly imposed on her. The air in first class felt as though it had thickened after Captain Mitchell's firm declaration. Vanessa could sense the doubt in everyone's eyes, as if she alone were responsible for this upheaval. She remained seated upright, showing no sign of capitulation, her gaze steady and proud as she looked directly at Captain Mitchell. In that moment, a soft crackle came over the headset microphone Laura was holding, shattering the tense silence. "Two security officers will board to inspect right away," Laura announced curtly, her voice low but clear enough for the entire cabin to hear. Vanessa gave a slight nod, silently hoping that the presence of security would clarify the situation and put an end to this uncomfortable charade. Just minutes later, brisk, confident footsteps echoed from the cabin door. Two uniformed security officers entered, the taller one, Derek Hayes, with a solid build and authoritative bearing. Beside him, a smaller but sharp-eyed colleague, Alicia Perez. "Good afternoon, Captain Mitchell," Derek said in a calm, professional tone. "We've been notified of an issue involving this passenger. Could you explain the situation?" "This passenger insists she has a valid first-class ticket but refuses to move," Captain Mitchell replied coldly, casting a condemning glance at Vanessa. "She's causing an unacceptable delay." Vanessa, still calm and composed, immediately handed her e-boarding pass and ID to Derek and Alicia. "Please feel free to verify everything," she said clearly, enunciating each word. "I'm confident this will resolve the matter." Derek took the documents and began a thorough check using his handheld device, while Alicia scrutinized every detail on Vanessa's phone screen. After just a few minutes, Derek's expression softened noticeably. He exchanged a knowing look with Alicia and then spoke with authority. "Everything checks out, no irregularities. Her documents and ticket are fully valid," he stated, turning to Captain Mitchell and Laura. His tone left no room for doubt. A few passengers murmured in relief, their suspicion shifting away from Vanessa and toward the flight crew. Yet Laura Evans stubbornly refused to accept the verdict. Her lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes narrowed in anger and obstinacy. Unable to contain herself, she blurted out, "This is ridiculous. People like her always find ways to game the system to pretend they belong here." Her words rang out sharply in first class, drawing shocked looks from Derek and Alicia. Passengers around them bristled with indignation at Laura's prejudiced outburst. Vanessa felt as if an invisible blade had pierced her. She clearly recognized the bias behind people like her. Derek's brow furrowed in disapproval as he spoke firmly. "Miss Evans, I must ask you to watch your language. We have verified this passenger's documents and ticket. There is no evidence of wrongdoing." Captain Mitchell's face tightened, but he said nothing further, perhaps realizing the gravity of Laura's remark. Passengers began whispering among themselves, casting reproachful glances at Laura. Vanessa lifted her chin and looked directly at Laura, her voice measured but each word resonant. "I'm truly disappointed that a customer service professional would resort to such blatant discrimination. Your bias has not only hurt me personally, but also tarnished the reputation and dignity of Atlantic Airways." For a moment, Laura's face flushed, not with shame, but with anger and embarrassment at being exposed in front of everyone. She opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated. Her initial confidence and arrogance had vanished completely. Captain Mitchell surveyed the cabin, seeming to realize the situation was spiraling out of his control. He turned quietly to the two security officers. "If everything has been verified, I will reconsider how to resolve this matter." Derek nodded solemnly. "Everything is clear, Captain. I recommend you handle this appropriately and justly." As Derek and Alicia exited, Vanessa caught Laura Evans's gaze. In that instant, Vanessa understood that this was no longer a personal conflict. It was a larger fight against the prejudices and injustices she and many others have endured silently. This time, she resolved, she would not back down or compromise because truth and justice deserved nothing less. The moment the two security officers disappeared behind the cabin door, the first-class cabin still felt thick with tension. Vanessa leaned back gently in her seat, focusing on steadying her breathing. Her eyes drifted across the aisle and landed on Chloe Turner, a young woman a few rows away whose live stream icon was glowing on her phone. Chloe glanced at Vanessa with deep sympathy before whispering into her camera, "Everyone can see it. Atlantic Airways just openly discriminated against a black passenger for no reason. This woman presented valid documents, yet they kept harassing her and even accused her of fraud based solely on her appearance." Within minutes, Chloe's live stream exploded across Twitter and Instagram. The hashtag #Atlantic Airways discrimination trended instantly, drawing thousands of interactions, shares, and outraged comments about the crew's biased behavior, especially Laura Evans's remarks and Captain Mitchell's rigid stance. Not far away, Dr. Emily Rhodes, a well-known physician who'd watched the entire scene, stood up slowly. She adjusted her gold-rimmed glasses, her calm yet resolute gaze reflecting years of fighting for justice. "Excuse me, Captain Mitchell," Emily's voice rang out clearly, capturing everyone's attention. "But I must say, your handling of this situation, and that of Miss Evans, is entirely unacceptable." Captain Mitchell frowned, clearly surprised and irritated that another passenger would speak up for Vanessa. "Ma'am, I've already stated we'll follow procedure. There's no need to make a bigger issue of this." "That's precisely the point," Emily pressed on, her tone firm and logical. "I observed from the start that Miss Bennett presented perfectly valid documents. So why did the crew refuse to accept that fact and continue to pressure her, even making racially discriminatory assumptions?" She turned to Laura Evans, her voice calm but cutting. "Miss Evans, your earlier comment was a serious insult, and I believe you owe this passenger an apology. I hope you realize your personal biases have no place in professional customer service." Laura stood frozen, her face flushing with embarrassment and anger. The negative attention from fellow passengers and Emily's direct challenge had completely undone her initial confidence. Still live streaming, Chloe captured Emily's entire statement. Comments poured in at lightning speed, with online communities demanding Atlantic Airways issue a public apology and take responsibility for their unprofessional, discriminatory actions. "How will Atlantic Airways respond to this clear evidence? We can't stay silent in the face of injustice," Chloe exclaimed into her phone. Captain Mitchell could feel the pressure mounting as more disappointed and critical stares turned his way. For the first time in his career, he realized that the authority he once wielded so confidently was powerless against the truth and the viral reach of social media. Vanessa glanced gratefully at Chloe and Emily. She felt a flicker of relief knowing her story would no longer be silenced, because now the whole world was watching and ready to stand with her. The moment the two security officers disappeared behind the cabin door, the tension in first class remained thick. Vanessa leaned back against her seat, forcing herself to breathe steadily. Her gaze drifted across the aisle and landed on Chloe Turner, a young woman whose live stream icon glowed on her phone's screen. Chloe had been recording the entire incident. Chloe gave Vanessa a sympathetic look before whispering into her camera, "You've seen this, right? Atlantic Airways has just openly discriminated against a black passenger for no valid reason. She showed them perfectly valid documents, but they kept harassing her and even accused her of fraud just based on how she looks." Within minutes, Chloe's livestream had gone viral on Twitter and Instagram. The hashtag Atlantic Airways discrimination exploded, drawing thousands of shares, comments, and expressions of outrage over the crew's biased treatment, especially Laura Evans's comments and Captain Mitchell's rigid attitude. A few rows away, Dr. Emily Rhodes, the respected physician who'd witnessed everything, stood up. She adjusted her gold-rimmed glasses, her calm authority radiating as she prepared to speak out. "Excuse me, Captain Mitchell, Miss Evans," Emily's voice rang out clearly, drawing everyone's attention. "I must say your handling of this situation is completely unacceptable." Captain Mitchell frowned, surprised and annoyed that another passenger would challenge him. "Ma'am, I've already explained we'll follow protocol. There's no need to escalate this." "That's exactly the problem," Emily pressed on, her tone firm. "I watched from the start. Ms. Bennett presented valid documentation. So, why did your crew refuse to accept that fact and continue to pressure her, even making racially biased assumptions?" She turned to Brenda Cooper, the airline supervisor who had just entered, her voice calm but incisive. "Miss Cooper, you owe this passenger an apology. Your crew's personal prejudices have no place in professional customer service." Brenda Cooper, who had strode in moments before, was a tall, confident, middle-aged woman in a dark navy uniform. She had taken in the scene with an icy glance before addressing the crew rather than the passengers. Now, she looked squarely at Vanessa. "Captain Mitchell, Miss Evans, update me on what's going on immediately," Brenda demanded, her tone stern and clearly siding with the crew. Laura Evans hurried over, her voice edged with indignation. "Miss Cooper, this passenger refuses to cooperate, even though security confirmed her documents. I believe she's deliberately causing trouble and delaying our flight." Brenda nodded, her gaze returning to Vanessa without a hint of empathy. "Let's cut to the chase, Miss Bennett. I'm ordering you to move to economy class, or deplane entirely, so we can depart on time." A wave of anger surged through Vanessa, but she kept her voice polite and firm. "Miss Cooper, I'll say it again. My ticket and ID have been verified as entirely legitimate. I don't understand why you're making this unreasonable demand." Brenda regarded her as if facing a stubborn child, her tone softening only slightly but still laced with authority. "The issue isn't just your documents. Your refusal to comply disturbs the other passengers. If you truly care about everyone's comfort on this flight, you'll do as we ask." Vanessa inhaled deeply, resolute. "The real issue here is the clear discrimination from your crew, and from you, Miss Cooper. Why must a fully validated passenger endure this baseless coercion?" Passengers around them nodded in agreement, their sympathies shifting openly to Vanessa. Dr. Rhodes stood supportively at Vanessa's side, her gaze fixed on Brenda as if underscoring Vanessa's point. But Brenda seemed unmoved by the crowd's reaction. She repeated her cold, uncompromising stance. "I'm sorry you feel that way. As a supervisory manager, I have the authority to address anything affecting the safety and schedule of this flight. Your uncooperative behavior is causing a major disruption. You must choose now." From across the aisle, Chloe's live stream continued to flood social media. Viewers erupted in outrage, demanding Atlantic Airways publicly explain and apologize. The hashtag #Atlantic Airways discrimination surged to the top of the trends, putting immense pressure on the airline's reputation. Vanessa's voice remained calm but unwavering. "Let me be clear. I've done nothing wrong. If you continue to force me, it constitutes serious discrimination, and I will pursue legal action." At the mention of legal recourse, Brenda's expression flickered with unease, but she quickly regained her steely resolve. "You have every right to do so, but to avoid further delay, my demand stands: move to economy or leave the aircraft." Dr. Emily Rhodes immediately intervened, her tone sharper than ever. "Miss Cooper, you're making a grave mistake by handling this in such a one-sided manner. As a senior supervisor, your duty is to impartially verify facts, not automatically side with your crew." A few nearby passengers applauded softly, their support for Emily's words palpable. The atmosphere grew even more charged as the cabin's attention shifted from Vanessa to the airline authorities, their stares filled with reproach. Brenda's jaw tightened. She realized she was cornered but refused to back down. "My decision is final. If Miss Bennet does not comply, I will have security escort her off this plane." Vanessa exhaled slowly, understanding that this standoff had reached a point of no return. She knew her next move would not only affect her, but send a powerful message to all who had faced, or would face, such blatant injustice. Whatever followed, she was determined not to yield to the blatant discrimination that Brenda Cooper and the flight crew had so aggressively forced upon her. The moment Brenda Cooper's unwavering stance ended, the first-class cabin seemed to freeze solid. Vanessa could feel the blatant injustice thrust upon her, yet she also knew this was no time for further argument. It was time to end this absurd charade once and for all. She reached slowly into the small bag on the seat beside her. Every movement was deliberate and composed, drawing every passenger's attention, as if they sensed something crucial was about to happen. From the bag, Vanessa withdrew a small, elegant business card, its gold logo embossed sharply on premium cardstock. "I had hoped I wouldn't have to do this, but it seems you've given me no other choice," Vanessa said quietly, her tone calm but carrying a strength she had only just revealed. She handed the card to Brenda, her gaze unwavering. Brenda glanced down, her confidence draining away as confusion and astonishment flooded her features. Her lips trembled as she read the inscription, "Vanessa Bennet, CEO, Bennet Enterprises." Vanessa rose from her seat and faced the entire cabin, her voice ringing out more confidently and clearly than ever before. "I am Vanessa Bennet, CEO of Bennet Enterprises. We currently own 23% of Atlantic Airways, the very airline you are flying today." Her words struck the cabin like thunder. Passengers who had doubted her moments ago now stared in stunned admiration and righteous outrage. Laura Evans, who had been so unyielding, stood frozen. Her face drained of color as the false veneer of authority she'd worn vanished completely. Panic and fear replaced her earlier arrogance. Captain Robert Mitchell was equally shocked. His eyes widened. He couldn't believe that the unassuming woman he had accused was actually one of the airline's largest shareholders. The cabin's tension skyrocketed, but now the balance of power had reversed. No one dared question the legitimacy of Vanessa's claim. Brenda Cooper, finally regaining her senses, stammered an apology, her voice trembling with regret. I truly had no idea who you were, Miss Bennet. I am so sorry for this terrible misunderstanding." Vanessa met Brenda's eyes, showing no vindictiveness. Her voice remained firm and authoritative. "This isn't about my background. It's about how you treat your customers, regardless of who they are, with respect and fairness. Your unprofessional conduct and unfounded prejudice caused this situation to spiral out of control." She paused, then looked at Laura and Captain Mitchell, each word striking like a hammer to their consciences. "I hope this serves as a profound lesson, not just for this crew, but for the entire airline. Discrimination based on appearance or any bias is utterly unacceptable." Soft claps began around the cabin, growing quickly into enthusiastic applause for Vanessa. Chloe Turner's live stream thrummed with excitement as she updated her viewers. "Unbelievable, everyone. The passenger they just discriminated against is CEO Vanessa Bennet, a major shareholder of Atlantic Airways. This airline will face serious consequences for today's actions." Captain Mitchell bowed his head in shame and regret, fully aware of the thoughtless behavior he had exhibited. Laura Evans gripped her seat for support, her initial pride wholly extinguished. Vanessa returned to her seat, gently smoothing down her simple gray hoodie, her expression composed. Yet inside, she felt a surge of relief and pride. Not for revealing her status, but because she'd had the courage to speak up, not only for herself, but for everyone who has suffered similar injustice and prejudice. From this moment on, she knew no one like Laura, Robert, or Brenda would dare judge another passenger so callously again. The moment Vanessa's powerful declaration ended, the first-class cabin fell into a stunned silence. But that hush was immediately shattered by a chorus of smartphone notifications. Chloe Turner's live stream had exploded across every social media platform. The hashtag number Atlantic Airways discrimination was no longer just a trending keyword. It had become a full-blown media storm, shaking the reputation of this once esteemed airline. Back at Atlantic Airways headquarters, CEO Patricia Vance's face went pale as she scrolled through the outraged comments flooding her phone. Each scathing post about the crew's unprofessional and prejudice-laden behavior stung more deeply than the last. Recognizing the severity of the crisis, Patricia immediately ordered an emergency board meeting to contain the fallout before it spiraled further out of control. Less than an hour later, the airline's board members, powerful, influential figures all, gathered in the top-floor conference room. The tension in the room was palpable. These were people accustomed to confidence and command, now etched with worry. "We need clarity, and we need it now." Patricia opened the meeting, her voice grave enough to silence the room. "Our airline's reputation is under serious threat because of thoughtless actions by today's flight crew." Beside her, Board Vice Chair Kenneth Marshall removed his glasses and massaged the bridge of his nose, his stress plain to see. "We're not just risking our public image. Vanessa Bennett is a major shareholder, and this could have devastating financial and strategic repercussions." Patricia frowned, exhaling in frustration. "What worries me even more is the blatant discrimination on display. It's completely antithetical to the values we've worked so hard to cultivate and promote." As the board absorbed the gravity of the situation, Patricia's phone vibrated. A new message appeared that she read and reread in shock, her complexion paling further. She steadied herself. "I've just received a direct message from Vanessa Bennett. She's added a crucial detail. Bennett Enterprises not only holds 23% of Atlantic Airways, but Ms. Bennett personally funded $500,000 of our cultural diversity initiative launched earlier this year." The conference room erupted into murmurs. Board members exchanged stunned looks. Even the typically unflappable Kenneth seemed taken aback as he turned to Patricia, voice uneasy. "That diversity program is one of our cornerstone strategies for improving our brand and expanding our market. Are we saying we just insulted the very person who financed it?" Patricia nodded, her eyes reflecting deep concern. "Exactly. And now, not only the public but the media, our investors, and millions of trusting passengers will demand answers for this egregious misstep." Heavy sighs filled the room as the board recognized the crisis they faced. They knew there was no margin for error or delay. Swift, decisive action was imperative. Jonathan Reed, one of the younger board members, spoke up anxiously. "We need an official apology immediately, and those responsible must be held accountable." Patricia, though visibly strained, agreed. "I concur, but more than that, we must demonstrate concrete steps to rebuild trust. Vanessa Bennett isn't just a shareholder or donor. She's become the voice for every passenger who's ever faced discrimination. We have to respond with genuine, thoughtful action." Silence settled over the boardroom as everyone grasped the profound stakes. Atlantic Airways' decades-long reputation hung in the balance. If they failed to act appropriately and promptly, the fallout could be catastrophic. Finally, Patricia rose, her gaze sweeping the room with unwavering resolve. "We will hold a press conference today. I will personally apologize on behalf of Atlantic Airways and outline the specific consequences for those involved. I will also reach out directly to Vanessa Bennett to apologize in person and discuss compensation and a comprehensive internal reform plan." One by one, the board members offered silent nods of agreement, resolute in their understanding that this crisis, while deeply damaging, also presented an opportunity. From the ashes of these thoughtless actions by Laura Evans and Captain Mitchell, Atlantic Airways had a chance to eliminate prejudice from its culture and rebuild its core values stronger than ever before. Just hours after the news went viral across all media outlets, the large screens in the airport lounge switched to a special live broadcast. Passengers immediately turned to watch as Vanessa Bennett appeared on screen, her expression serious, yet composed. Vanessa looked straight into the camera. On the other end sat the entire Atlantic Airways board, gathered in the company's headquarters boardroom. Their tension was palpable in every nervous glance and subtle gesture. CEO Patricia Vance occupied the central chair, her usual confidence replaced by visible strain and helplessness. "Good afternoon," Vanessa began softly but firmly. "I hope everyone here understands why this emergency meeting is being broadcast live. I believe transparency is the first and most necessary step to address this issue." Patricia nodded, her voice unusually careful and gentle. "Ms. Bennett, we deeply regret the shameful incident that occurred. We are committed to resolving it at its root and ensuring nothing like this ever happens again." Vanessa acknowledged the apology with a slight nod, her gaze still sharp. "Apologies are important, but concrete action matters even more. I'm not here for vague promises. I want to ensure Atlantic Airways implements clear, specific changes, immediately." Her eyes swept the board members. "First, I demand the immediate termination of flight attendant Laura Evans, who exhibited blatant racial discrimination toward me." At the sound of her name, Laura, standing off to the side, went pale, her hands trembling as she bowed her head. Surrounding passengers cast her open looks of condemnation. Vanessa pressed on, her voice growing stronger and more resolute. Likewise, Captain Robert Mitchell, who failed to fulfill his basic duty to verify the facts and instead judged me with clear prejudice, must also be fired at once. Captain Mitchell froze, his face ashen and his arrogance crumbling under the weight of her demand. Turning to Airline Supervisor Brenda Cooper, Vanessa continued decisively. "As for Ms. Cooper, who handled this matter without objectivity and sided with the crew, I demand her demotion and mandatory retraining in diversity awareness before she may resume her duties." Brenda stood rooted in place, her grip tightening on the edge of the podium as she absorbed the consequences of her partiality. Patricia Vance, still tense but determined to comply, replied, "We understand and will carry out each of your demands immediately." But Vanessa was not finished. She fixed the camera with an even sterner gaze. Two more urgent requirements. First, within 72 hours, Atlantic Airways must roll out mandatory diversity and anti-discrimination training for all employees, from cabin crew to top management. This training must be thorough and effective. The board members exchanged uneasy, worried looks, but no one dared oppose this clear, reasonable demand. Vanessa continued, her tone unwavering. Second, Atlantic Airways must establish an independent reporting system for discrimination complaints from both staff and passengers. This system must guarantee full impartiality and transparency, with the goal of eradicating all discriminatory behavior within the airline. She paused, then looked Patricia in the eye, her expression stern yet sincere. We all know today's events weren't simply an isolated mistake. They were the inevitable result of a system that has allowed bias to persist unchecked for too long. Patricia Vance inhaled deeply, then spoke with genuine seriousness. I pledge we will implement all of these measures immediately. We fully recognize the gravity of this crisis, and we understand that only decisive, concrete action can restore the trust we've lost. Vanessa gave a slight, resolute nod. Thousands of passengers watching this live stream alongside myself will be monitoring your follow-through. I hope these promises prove more than empty words, that they mark the beginning of genuine change, making Atlantic Airways a positive model for the entire aviation industry. Her remarks concluded, the boardroom fell into heavy silence. In the lounge outside, passengers broke into resounding applause, showing their strong support and deep admiration for Vanessa's courage and determination. Everyone understood. From this moment on, Atlantic Airways could no longer afford to overlook or excuse any act of discrimination, now that the world was watching so closely. The moment CEO Patricia Vance's pledge ended, the Atlantic Airways boardroom fell into a tense silence. On the live-stream screen, Vanessa sat composed, her sharp eyes studying every expression of the powerful executives before her. She understood this was a pivotal moment that would decide the airline's reputation, future, and brand value. In the boardroom, a few directors whispered among themselves, faces etched with anxiety. Jonathan Reed, a young but highly respected board member, turned to Patricia with a grave look and asked, "If we agree to all of these demands immediately, won't that create significant internal upheaval? Firing so many senior employees at once will surely meet with considerable opposition." Patricia frowned and sighed deeply. She understood the potential fallout better than anyone, but her voice remained firm and rational. "We have no choice. If we don't comply with these demands, we risk losing all trust from our customers and shareholders, and that would plunge the airline into an unprecedented crisis." Harold Thompson, a senior director, spoke in a measured tone. "But if we implement everything too quickly, will we be prepared? We need to consider the consequences carefully before acting." At that moment, Vanessa spoke clearly and decisively from the screen, immediately drawing everyone's attention away from their private discussions. "I understand your concerns, but this is not the time for hesitation or bargaining. Bennett Enterprises invested in Atlantic Airways not only for profit, but because we believed in the airline's core values. If those values aren't upheld, we are prepared to withdraw our entire investment." Her words rang out like a thunderclap, directly striking at the board's conscience. Patricia felt a chill run down her spine as she looked around and saw genuine panic on her colleagues' faces. Behind them, Laura Evans and Captain Robert Mitchell stood quietly, overhearing everything. Laura's eyes were full of regret and fear. She now grasped the gravity of her thoughtless actions. Captain Mitchell stood still, experiencing for the first time the true weight of his stubborn pride and the consequences of his failure. Patricia finally spoke, her tone slow and cautious. "Ms. Bennett, I assure you that Atlantic Airways will earnestly implement every condition you've demanded. However, could you grant us a brief period to roll out these measures in a more orderly fashion?" Vanessa shook her head firmly, her gaze unwavering. "I'm sorry, Miss Vance, but we cannot afford any more delay. The time to act is now. The public, our customers, and our investors are watching closely how the airline handles this crisis." Jonathan Reed looked to Patricia with concern. "We can't risk catastrophic financial loss if Bennett Enterprises pulls out. Beyond the finances, our reputation would be irreparably destroyed." Patricia nodded, meeting each director's gaze in turn. I agree with Jonathan. We cannot gamble any further. We must fulfill Miss Bennett's demands immediately." A hush settled over the boardroom, and after a reluctant pause, Harold Thompson exhaled and said, "If this is the only way to avert a greater crisis, I agree. We must take responsibility for our staff's mistakes." One by one, the other directors nodded in reluctant but determined agreement. Finally, Patricia turned back to the camera and addressed Vanessa with sincere gravity. "Miss Bennett, the Atlantic Airways Board formally commits to immediately carrying out all your conditions. We will terminate Flight Attendant Laura Evans and Captain Robert Mitchell, demote Supervisor Brenda Cooper, launch mandatory diversity training within 72 hours for all employees, and establish an independent system to receive and handle discrimination complaints." Vanessa nodded once, her voice softening for the first time. "I appreciate your swift and wise decision. I believe this will be the turning point for Atlantic Airways to truly uphold the values you once promised to the public." As the video conference ended, the boardroom remained quiet in thoughtful reflection. Patricia exhaled heavily, sitting back in her chair, fully aware of the weight on her shoulders. Today's decisions would profoundly shape the airline's future. Outside, passengers watching on the airport's large screens broke into enthusiastic applause. They recognized that Vanessa Bennett had not only defended her own rights, but also spoken for millions of passengers who have silently endured discrimination. From this moment on, no one could ignore this vital issue any longer. Moments after the tense board meeting ended, the Atlantic Airways boardroom lay under a heavy silence, yet everyone understood that the decision they had just made was unavoidable. Within hours, under intense public and media pressure, CEO Patricia Vance was forced to act swiftly and decisively to avert a far deeper reputational and financial crisis. Less than 24 hours after the incident, the airline's HR office issued formal termination notices to Flight Attendant Laura Evans and Captain Robert Mitchell. Laura sat in stunned silence, staring at the letter in her trembling hands, fear and disappointment written across her face. Everything she had worked for as a flight attendant was gone, snatched away by her own thoughtlessness and prejudice. In the locker room mirror, she barely recognized herself. Someone who had lost it all to biases she'd once refused to acknowledge. Captain Mitchell, who had long prided himself on his years of flying and sterling reputation, felt overwhelming shame and helplessness for the first time in his career. As he walked away from the cockpit of his final flight, he realized he would never again don the revered pilot's uniform. The price of his arrogance and unfair treatment of Vanessa Bennett had finally been paid. Meanwhile, Brenda Cooper was summoned to the senior management office, where she received official notification of her demotion to a junior training role. She sat pale and stunned, eyes wide with disbelief at the severity and finality of the leadership's decision. Patricia Vance, seated across from her, spoke with calm firmness. "Brenda, as a manager, you must remain objective and fair at all times. Because you failed in that duty, you will undergo specialized bias awareness and diversity training before resuming any responsibilities here." Brenda bowed her head, acutely aware of her failure and shame. Yet she also recognized this as an opportunity to confront her own mistakes and fundamentally change the flawed attitudes she had long harbored. Beyond these individual actions, Patricia immediately ordered the rollout of comprehensive, mandatory bias prevention training for every Atlantic Airways employee. Within 72 hours, all staff, cabin crew, pilots, ground personnel, and senior management alike were required to complete courses on cultural diversity, anti-discrimination, and bias awareness. Simultaneously, the airline established a fully independent reporting system to receive and investigate claims of discriminatory behavior from both customers and employees. This was the most critical step to ensure such an incident could never recur. At Atlantic Airways headquarters, the atmosphere crackled with urgency and hope for real change. Though some employees initially doubted the effectiveness of the new programs, everyone understood that genuine transformation was now the only path forward. For Patricia Vance, these measures weren't merely a crisis response. They were a chance to reaffirm the foundational values that had once made Atlantic Airways a sustainable leader. In an all-staff meeting, she emphasized, "Remember, Atlantic Airways represents more than premium air travel. We stand for ethics and respect for every person. The changes we implement today are prerequisites for restoring the trust and respect of our customers, shareholders, and the wider community." Watching these swift, decisive actions unfold, Vanessa Bennett took to social media. In a post shared tens of thousands of times, she wrote, "I appreciate Atlantic Airways' timely and transparent steps. This is just the beginning. What matters now is sustaining this commitment, not only in the coming days or weeks, but as a lasting foundation of the airline's culture." Her words spread rapidly, further pressuring leadership by reminding them the world was watching. Outside Atlantic Airways offices, passengers and media alike expressed wholehearted support for Vanessa. They recognized that her fight went beyond defending her own rights. It ignited a powerful momentum forcing major corporations to uproot long-standing, unjust biases at their core. In a quiet moment of reflection, Vanessa felt both relief and pride, not because she had won, but because she had proven that one individual, no matter how seemingly small, could become the catalyst for profound, positive change in society. No sooner had Atlantic Airways begun rolling out its decisive measures than Vanessa Bennett's story transcended the airline itself, becoming a powerful message of equality sweeping across America. Millions of social media users kept sharing the hashtag #Atlantic Airways discrimination, turning what once seemed a personal dispute into a broad, dynamic social movement. Before long, the ripples from this incident reached other major transportation and travel companies. Greyhound, the nation's largest intercity bus service, immediately convened an emergency meeting to review its customer service protocols and announce an anti-discrimination training program, directly inspired by the demands Vanessa made of Atlantic Airways. In an official statement to the press, Greyhound's CEO affirmed, "We pledge not only to improve our service, but to ensure that none of our passengers ever endure discrimination when traveling with Greyhound." Shortly thereafter, Amtrak, the national rail carrier, long known for its cautious approach to internal reforms, was compelled to act swiftly as well. Amtrak's leadership announced the immediate rollout of an independent reporting system alongside mandatory cultural diversity training for all employees, from ticket agents to the operators of its long-distance routes. At stations nationwide, new signs reading "Zero Tolerance for Discrimination" were prominently displayed, signaling a steadfast commitment to the traveling public. The ripple effect soon reached the hotel industry, where major chains like Marriott, Hilton, and Hyatt each declared comprehensive overhauls of their employee training programs and the establishment of independent discrimination reporting channels. Renowned for their service quality, these hotels now recognized, under public pressure, the social responsibility they bore. Amid this wave of corporate reform, the U.S. government stepped in to address the public's strong reaction. At a formal press briefing in Washington, D.C., the Secretary of Transportation announced a new federal regulation dubbed the Atlantic Airways Rules. Named after the incident that sparked the movement, These rules require every transportation provider nationwide, from airlines and railroads to long-distance buses, to publish transparent procedures for handling and resolving complaints of racial discrimination. We want to send a clear message. No individual, regardless of race or social standing, must ever suffer discrimination while using transportation services in America, the Secretary declared. What happened at Atlantic Airways is a painful lesson, but also a critical opportunity for meaningful change. Human rights organizations, social activists, and business leaders alike lauded the new regulations, while companies across the transport and travel sectors understood they must adapt quickly or risk becoming the next target of public criticism. Back at Atlantic Airways headquarters, Patricia Vance watched these developments with a mixture of pride and concern. She realized that her airline had become the focal point of an unprecedented reform movement, and that her responsibility now was to ensure the commitments made were more than words, but rather the bedrock of a lasting, inclusive corporate culture. Meanwhile, Brenda Cooper, the former supervisor whose actions helped spark the crisis, sat attentively in bias awareness training. For the first time in her career, she truly grasped the impact of her previous mindset. Though she no longer wielded unchecked authority, Brenda felt that at last she was growing into her social responsibility. Across social media, news of positive changes at major corporations inspired countless individuals who had previously suffered discrimination but stayed silent. Encouraged by Vanessa's bold stand, they found the courage to share their own stories, fueling a real and powerful social movement. Watching it all, Vanessa felt gratitude and pride. She understood that this ripple effect was far more than a response to her own experience. It was proof that society could grow more vigilant and more resolute against long-standing injustices. For her, that was the greatest reward. Clear evidence that a single individual, armed with determination and courage, can ignite change across an entire society. 2 years after the wave of reforms sparked by Vanessa Bennett's case swept the nation, her story once again took center stage at the National Conference on Transportation Equity, held with great fanfare in 2003, Washington, D.C. This time, Vanessa walked onto the stage in an entirely new role. Not only as the powerful CEO of Bennett Enterprises, but as a powerful symbol, the voice of millions of travelers who had endured injustice. Below her, in the vast auditorium, thousands of delegates hung on her every word. Corporate leaders, policymakers, and passionate young activists seeking inspiration to drive real change in their communities. Soft stage lights illuminated Vanessa's face as she began, "2 years ago, I went through an ordeal none of us wished for. But from that moment I realized that each of us has the power to change society, if we're brave enough to speak up." In a corner of the hall, Laura Evans listened intently, her eyes filled with emotion. 2 years after being dismissed from Atlantic Airways, Laura had undergone a difficult but profound personal transformation. Once a woman who openly displayed prejudice, she had become a leading diversity consultant, helping major corporations understand the importance of equality and social justice. Now, all she felt for Vanessa was heartfelt respect for opening a new path for her life. Vanessa continued, her voice persuasive and sincere. "We've witnessed many painful incidents, but what we've learned is that the solution isn't merely punishing a few individuals. We need more than that. We need to overhaul our systems, establish transparent, fair mechanisms that protect everyone." Her words resonated powerfully across the hall, drawing thunderous applause. Vanessa turned toward Laura and offered a gentle smile of empathy and forgiveness. Laura returned the gesture with a sincere nod. These two women were no longer adversaries but icons of reconciliation and progress. Among the younger attendees, Angela Simmons watched with tears in her eyes. Vanessa's story had given Angela the courage to pursue justice after experiencing a similar incident on another flight. Encouraged by Vanessa, Angela pressed her own case, which later became a landmark legal precedent protecting millions of future travelers. Seemingly reading Angela's mind, Vanessa said, "Angela's story and mine aren't isolated examples. They prove that sweeping social change begins with the courage of individuals and the perseverance to gather clear evidence. It's speaking out and pursuing justice that creates lasting change." The auditorium grew even more emotional as Vanessa emphasized, "I believe we can not only change individual attitudes and behaviors, but transform entire systems. When systems change, they protect everyone fairly and comprehensively. That is our ultimate goal." Her speech concluded to sustained, rousing applause. Those present knew her words were more than a personal narrative. They were a collective pledge toward a fairer, more inclusive future. After the conference, Laura Evans approached Vanessa, shy but grateful. "Thank you, Vanessa. Because of your courage and resolve, I was able to confront my own mistakes and truly change. You didn't just overhaul a system, you transformed people." Vanessa gently placed a hand on Laura's shoulder and smiled warmly. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become, Laura. Your journey shows that anyone can change, so long as we face our errors and are willing to learn." Angela Simmons joined them, her voice trembling with emotion. "Your story gave me the strength to stand up for myself and others. Thank you for being my greatest inspiration." Vanessa looked at Angela with heartfelt affection, feeling joy and fulfillment. She understood that her trials, even though painful, had become invaluable opportunities to spark real, meaningful change. And so, the story that once shook society to its core was no longer just one person's journey. It had become a rallying cry for profound societal transformation, a reminder that any one of us can be the spark that ignites lasting, positive change in the world. If you found this story meaningful and inspiring, please click like, share it with friends and family, and subscribe so you won't miss our next compelling narratives. Thank you all for watching, and see you in the next story.